And I like to start sessions by reviewing the communication model because all of us who've been through any kind of education, from primary, secondary, tertiary, we have gone through the communication model, but we so often forget about some of the key elements of that communication model. So this is going to be a very brief kind of review of it. And I want to start by asking you to give me some feedback. If A wants to communicate to B, I want you to tell me what is the first thing that happens. We're slowing down the communication model. And because we are not technical, and just in case you didn't recognize it, there's A and B, right? There's two people, right? Humor me. This is A and this is B. Aren't they? Yeah, right. So if A wants to communicate to B, what is the first thing that happens? It's what? He picks up the cell phone. Long before he picks up the cell phone, what happens? He has a thought. So something happens in A's brain, okay? So A has a thought. After that, what happens? He didn't pick up his cell phone yet, huh? What's the next thing that happens? He has to organize his ideas. So all of that is still the brain process. What happens after that? He has to get B's attention. And if we're looking at them face to face here, what's the next thing that you think happens? Eye contact. And after that, what happens? Acknowledgement. And what is the mechanism for that acknowledgement? You and I are talking here. I have a thought in my brain. What's the next thing I do? I speak to you. So it goes from his brain to his mouth. After that, what happens? It's received, but before it's received,
he has to send the message.
He has to send the message. And the message goes over what?
The medium.
And the medium generally is? Yeah, but those words, right, okay, those words travel, yes, that comes through his mouth. And those words travel on sound waves, don't they? All right? Before they go to his ear. Forget my drawing. So it goes to his ear, right? Goes through over the sound waves, goes to his ear. Then it goes to B's brain, right? And after B's brain, it generally goes back to B's mouth. He says something. Then it travels back here to A's ear, and then goes to A's brain. All right? So if we had to track, and this is a very simplified form of the communication model and what happens with a message. It starts 1 in the brain, 2, it goes through the mouth, 3, it travels over the sound waves, 4, the ear, 5, the brain, 6, the mouth, 7, the ear, no, 7 is the sound waves again, 8 is the ear, and 9 is the brain. And we're saying that this is the sender and this is the receiver, there's a medium, okay? And in the simplest form of communication, oftentimes, at least from where I stand, what I think is not what I say. What I say is not what you hear. What you hear is generally not what you interpret. And then what you interpret is generally not what you say. And then what you say is generally not what I hear. And what I hear is not necessarily what I interpret. So we end up with endless confusion in our communication. And we end up with that confusion because there are a number of barriers to communication. What are some examples of barriers to communication? Language is a big barrier. And when you say language, what are you talking about? Tell me. And when we talk about language, we can be talking about differences in language in terms of French, Spanish, German, Italian, whatever. We also could be talking about people's approaches to language, that we think we all speak the same. We speak English generally, but our approach to language is different. I certainly am observing that there's a language of the street that I'm losing contact with, that I do not understand. A young person approaches you and says something, and I say, huh? And then they look at me as kind of elitist. But it's not that I'm elitist. It is that there is such a gap between where I operate and where some young people operate, that language becomes a barrier. So we now have to spend a lot of time asking people, tell me more. What do you mean? This is what I understand, before we can clarify exactly what was said. The other issue I am observing in Trinidad when we think of language is all of a sudden I am being spoken to in Spanish on the street. I don't know, is anybody else having that experience? Nobody's approaching you in Spanish on the streets, all right? Huh?
Not really.
That's excellent.
We would like to get that experience.
That's excellent. Try Arapita Avenue, Port of Spain, you know, those kinds of places, and you'll get it. Even around the savannah, you sometimes get it.
I will go there.
I hope for the reasons that we are explaining. All right.
It's very difficult for me to really define that people here in Trinidad
Speaking Spanish, speaking other language. All right. An observation I certainly I have made is, for instance, in the Shogunas market, I'm beginning to hear another language. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm hearing a background language. Anybody from Shogunas goes to the Shogunas market hearing a language? No? All right, that might be my idiosyncrasy. But language is a big barrier. What are some other barriers? Culture. Tell me how culture is a barrier.
See, we explained before about language. Actually, culture affects language. Sorry. Culture affect the language. The youngsters on our society now have a different type of culture than the one that we grow up. As well, culture is the knowledge that you have, technical knowledge that you have, or lack of technical knowledge. That is as well in the culture, and yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Any comments on culture and technical knowledge, as has been explained there?
It has to do a lot with the traditions and belief of the people that you interact with. If I may draw an example, I remember while doing my Ramesh Ramdeen, and we had this discussion, and there was a group that went to China. And to enter the rooms, the Chinese like to wine you and dine. They want to know you more. They like to spend a lot of time with you. Whereas the American culture is different. It's a, suit and tie, type in, go to a restaurant, a room, and you sign your documents and you go. The Chinese like to keep you because they want to understand. They think about long-term business. And on entering the rooms, one of the guys did not remove their shoes. And that brought about a huge problem. And they got up and they walked out. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to understand the culture and beliefs of those that we want to interact with.
Those that you want to do business with, and you also have to make a decision. Why am I doing business with this person whose culture is so far away from my own? It means that I have a lot to learn. The learning curve is going to be pretty steep. Thank you for that excellent contribution, because we come right to the issue of how does culture impact our communication. And we need to be very clear about that. You're entering a Chinese market, you're entering an Indian market, you're entering an African market, you're entering a Latin American market. What are the idiosyncrasies there? What are the things that I need to be very familiar with, very comfortable with, in order to embrace people or to have people embrace me? Because the point that was made there is that very much in the American culture, which I think we're dominated by, meaning the US, North American culture, which Trinidad I think is dominated by, we're doing the business, and here's the documents. Once the lawyers have signed off on the documents, we're good. In other cultures, before we even think of a legal document, I need to know who you are. What do you really represent? Am I comfortable with you? Have I had a meal with you? Do I know if you have children? Do I know if you have a partner? What is that partner's role in your life? And then in some cultures, that is what will determine whether you make the next step to business. And then for some of us who are dominated by a North American culture, you may, was that me? You may find that absolutely invasive. So we have to understand it, and that's where we're going to have to do the audience profile. But let's come back. Thank you very much for that contribution. Let's come back to language. We're talking about some barriers, and we say language is a barrier. We say culture is a barrier, and we need to recognize that when we talk about culture, we're talking about learned behavior. What are the things that I have learned that make me behave the way I do? What are the inputs to that? Where did it come from? And how will that impact on the people with whom I'm attempting to do business? All of that is wrapped up in culture. So we use one little word, but it is all embracing. It encompasses quite a lot. Technical knowledge came out as a possible barrier to communication, and that's a big barrier. If you don't know, if it's not your area of competence, if you're not a subject matter expert on the issue, you shouldn't be representing the company. Any comments on that? If you're not an SME on whatever the area is, you should not be representing the company. Comments? Excellent. Can you say that again, Dax?
Well, I think you're fine as long as you don't present yourself as a subject matter expert, and you say, I am not the subject matter expert on this, but I think what we're doing in this area is as follows, and I can get you the further information. If you pretend that you're the subject matter expert, particularly talking to a subject matter expert, then you'll get yourself in big trouble.
In big trouble. Thank you very much. So we're saying that you need to be a subject matter expert on your area. So I'm a communicator. I can talk about communications. I can't talk about whatever the details are, the details of whatever the transaction is. I may know some parameters. So I need to be a subject matter expert on my area and not pretend on another person's area. Because what the world is looking for is authenticity. People want to know that you are honest enough to say that that's not my area. I can get the marketing, I can get somebody else to contact you. Any other barriers to communication? Yes?
I would say, the right word might be prejudice, but the person you're talking to makes assumptions about the person from a visual cue.
Yep.
So that they see somebody dressed in a certain way or looking in a certain way, and so their brain will, that bias of the person say, okay, that person doesn't know what they're talking about because of the way that they're presented. And so whatever good the words are, the person's brain is telling them that that person doesn't know what they're talking about, or they.
And we need to remember that in communication, the first impression is what will make a difference. You come into an organization, you come into an encounter, you come into a meeting, and you don't give the person eye contact. They may have a view about that. If culturally eye contact is one of the values that they have, as opposed to in some cultures, you're taught not to have eye contact. But if we accept, and I'm saying, we can argue, we can have a discussion about it, but I'm saying that we're dominated by a North American culture and the North American values. So eye contact, whether you're male or female, is important. Yeah.
But in some cultures, we have, before you speak, you have a handshake. In some cultures, that actually is not a preamble.
Yeah.
In Spanish
So,
cultures, it is.
In the Spanish cultures?
They are a preamble. Before you start to speak, you actually handshake the person, and after you
Okay.
speak.
So he's adding, in terms of language, we're talking about some of the nonverbals, and he says in Spanish cultures, the handshake is important. And we need to understand how to do a handshake. It's palm to palm and no more than 3 pumps, and it's a firm grip. Can we shake each other's hands on the tables? Come on, shake his hand. And some of you, yes, lovely. But there's some things that accompany that handshake. Hi, I'm Denise, pleased to meet you. But you should stand. Thank you very much, Ricardo. Pleased to meet you. So you see that you engage people, you have a firm grip, you give them the eye contact, and you end up with that 30-second version of who you are and what you're doing. We all need to establish what is the 30-second commercial about who I am, why I'm here, what am I doing. You should be able to rattle it off almost in your sleep. So when you represent the organization, you very easily make that first set of contact. Let's go back to the issue of prejudices and biases. We can't control other people's prejudices and biases. We can't control them. That is what I have. I have prejudices. I have some biases. We can't control it. What I can do is present myself in a way that neutralizes or minimizes those biases and prejudices that you might have. Comments on that? Any examples of prejudices and biases? Any biases on this table? What would you say is a bias that you have or a prejudice that you have? Huh? Color? Tell me about that. Some people are racial, he's saying. Tell me about that. Sorry to put you on the spot, but tell me about that.
Some people are racial, and for example, you may have persons from the US or even in Trinidad who are of Indian descent and may not appreciate the Negro culture or the Chinese culture because of the difference of their skin, how they look, texture of their hair.
Are you saying, and if I may continue to engage you, are you saying in a business context, someone may take one look at someone like me and say, that is a person of African descent, I want nothing to do with them?
It can happen, yes.
Yes, 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 yes. Huh? Religion? How do you know my religion from just looking at me?
And they do have some biases and prejudices when it comes to doing business. I'm not going to say all, but I've experienced it already, where they probably will choose another business partner to work with based on that. And it may not only be the Muslim religion, I just had that experience. But religion is a bias as well.
Religion is a big bias, and it affects business. But it's something that we need to be very careful about, because people can respond quite negatively to that. There's a whole, and when we talked about shaking hands, I hope that some of you thought that there are Muslim women who cannot shake a man's hand. And what is the responsibility? You know, if you join an organization, and you join the organization, marketing is part of the organization, do you have, what is your right, what is your responsibility to be able to say to the organization subsequently, you know, I can't shake men's hands, and therefore I'm using a hypothetical case, I'm using it from a woman's point of view, and therefore I cannot carry out that marketing rule. And what is the responsibility of the organization? Okay, it means, and you're right, the question is, if you can't shake somebody's hand, does that mean you can't perform the job? Of course you can perform the job. But if we're saying that when we communicate, people have biases and prejudices, and we're saying that in a North American culture, which is what we're dominated by, then the shaking of the hand can be an impediment to the business communication, and to the marketing, and to getting the business. Yes?
Just to kind of answer what Ryan was saying too, it also comes up, and this may come up in your future lesson. It's about knowing your customer. So, for example, I've been in the business in the grocery business, and I will ask the person, I say, okay, we're going to go and visit this one. It's a fact in Trinidad, most of the grocery stores, well, now Chinese are coming back, but East Indian community owns a lot of the grocery stores, and a lot of them Muslim. So you have to ask and say, okay, who's this person I'm going to visit? Anything I should know? Can I shake their hand? Because I've had the example where when I was early in the game and I went and my person did not tell me, and obviously, you know, you're going up and shaking, and then I realized they looked at me in a kind of strange way. And then, of course, it occurred, I was like, of course, primary school, you can't shake, you know, obviously. And it was a male. He wasn't shaking hands. It wasn't even a female. But everybody has, I guess, their personal religious idiosyncrasies. So you have to understand that before, and it comes in going to know the customer, who you're going to meet, and you just don't go and walk in gung-ho and, oh, hi, and assume your culture and what you've grown up, because everybody's different. I mean, well, it's a fact of the matter. It's who you grew up with, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you even there were looking back into the happy Texaco Hallison days there, looking to the start, because I know that because I grew up there too, so I know exactly what you meant, and know where it was before probably family, now is a whole amalgamation, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to know who you're getting into.
So we really have to do that audience profile. So coming back to and all of this has to do with the communications model, We're still talking the communication model. And you see how much richness that has come out of it. So we need to understand who the target audience is, measure the message to the target audience. So by way of revision, we say that in any communication activity, there's a sender, there's a receiver, there's a medium, and there's some noise in that channel, and there's also some feedback. And depending on the feedback, so when A says something to B and B gives some feedback, then A will modify the message. So you're going to the grocery store and the man did not respond to you, you need to go and say, but why didn't he respond to me? So you rearrange your message and you go back. So maybe you send somebody else and you go back to him. And you keep going around and around. We're saying that communication is an iterative process. It goes around and around. In the 1990s, and sometimes I feel so old, but I'm happy to be old. There are lots of benefits of being old. In the 1990s, the quality movement swept across the world, and it was headed by Duran, Crosby, and Deming. That's Deming with one M, and he's Caucasian, so there's no relationship. And the important thing that the quality movement has left with us is that it reinforced that we need to have a receiver-centered approach to communication as opposed to a sender-centered approach to communication. And what they said is that until the receiver has acted in the way the sender intended, then we have not communicated. Now, when we translate that into business, what we're saying is that until your business partner or your audience acts in a way that you intended, then you have not communicated. That means you have to go back. You have to refine the message and go back to them. Any comments on that? Yes?
Something that's very interesting. We talked about sharing of information. We're also talking about entering an international market where cultures may converge, may morph into different ways. Are we seeing a movement or a trend in the way culture is merging for global businesses, i.e., I could understand prior to this big move about internationalization, so people were steeped in their traditions, but you're also having mobility of persons working in transnational businesses and so. So are we seeing, for example, a higher accommodation of differences in culture and people not being that stiff in saying, okay, if I don't take my shoe off, I can't do business with you? Are we seeing that movement happening in the global business? And is that something that we should be attentive to and be observant on, or be instrumental in driving?
All right. My research is that it's really not changing. When you interface with people on an interpersonal basis, two of us, company versus company, we still have to be very cognizant of people's cultural idiosyncrasies and what their expectations are. The big shift that you're seeing is because a lot of business is occurring on the internet. The receiver oftentimes is anonymous, is almost without a picture. And what people are interested in there is really the numbers. When you're making the order, what's the size of the order, who's the banker behind this order, so those are the things that people are more interested in. But when we come to the interpersonal, the issues of the cues and clues about your cultural disposition, those are still critical. Comments? Feedback? Anybody want to challenge that? No. Well, yeah.
Another barrier which I'm fairly aware of, particularly from using trade missions, and this is really a barrier between your numbers 1 and 2 and your numbers 4 and 5. A lot of business is done at cocktail receptions as people have had a few glasses of wine, or and sometimes your cognitive ability deteriorates after a few glasses of wine, and what your brain thinks and what your mouth says become two different things.
All right, Dax, because you've brought that on the table, I will just deal with that very quickly now. And a lot of people will disagree with what I'm saying, and that's okay. When you go to a cocktail or any entertainment associated with your business, you are there for the business and not for you. So there's some rules you should really operate by. One of them is a no alcohol rule. Even if you have to mask your drink with something, but a no alcohol rule. Comments on that? Yes. we go back to being audience-centered. You need to understand your audience. But the point that I think is coming on the table was that issue of how alcohol impacts your cognition. And you don't want to have a negative impact on your cognition and then be seen differently. So you have to be very, very careful with alcohol. Yes?
To me, the big thing is being conscious of it. So then knowing also, don't commit to anything, or don't, and that's when I think it's important. Let's say, so if you had a drink, you think, okay, would I be making this decision if I hadn't? And we're say, shut up, be quiet, don't say anything, and talk about something else, and say, let's discuss this tomorrow.
But there's another approach to it. Would I be comfortable if my dentist or surgeon took a drink before performing whatever the procedure is? Would I be? What's the difference between that and your business proposition? There's no difference between that and your business proposition. They are equally important, they're equally critical. So we all have to make a decision about alcohol. And in these days, unfortunately, we also have to make decisions about, I don't even know a politically correct way to say this, but illegal drugs. Because there are situations in which there are people who smoke marijuana and think that, but we do that, that's not a problem. It's what? I'm not talking about 201. You see why I love a Trini audience? So we have to make those kinds of decisions. And generally, the bar is, I'm not, as a business person representing my organization, I'm not going to be involved in anything that's illegal. That's really the bottom line on it. All right, back to the communication model and the comment I was making about unless the receiver acts in the way the sender intended, you have not really communicated. It means you have to go and find another opportunity. You have to go and rework whatever it is you were presenting to ensure that this receiver acts in the way that you're intended. All right, another comment I want to make about the communication model is we need to recognize that there's a distinction between the interpersonal communication and the intrapersonal communication. That is the communication that's going on in my head, that I'm talking to you, or I'm here and I'm interacting with you, but in my head is all my biases, all my prejudices, all the issues that I have. People may not know exactly why you're a little disconnected, but they do feel a sense of disconnection. So in the communication encounter, you really have to start by emptying your head of anything that is not germane to whatever the subject is. Otherwise, that impacts how you communicate. Comments on that? When we're doing written communication, we need to focus on accuracy, brevity, and conciseness. That's the ABC of written communication: accuracy, brevity, and conciseness. So you need to be accurate in what exactly am I trying to say. Be very clear about that. In another life, I teach business communication at the university, and I say to students, when you're writing an exam, you really need to have your objective in one sentence. If you have that objective in one sentence, whatever flows from that will generally be okay. And the way to do that is to convert the question into a sentence. Yes?
I was just thinking, not just have your objective in one sentence, but have your objective somewhere at the top, because you go through 3 pages of introductions and you don't know what they're trying to say.
Yeah. All right, I think that's another teacher coming out there. And when we translate that into the business environment, you have a report to write or you have a letter to write. Why am I doing this? What is my objective? And you keep that in front of you. My style generally is a flip chart or something on the wall that has whatever the objective is. So if I'm doing a RFP, I would put the objective of the RFP on the wall while I'm preparing it. So every time I just go off a little, I go straight back to that. So in terms of written communication, we have to be extremely careful because what you write generally will bind you. What we say, we sometimes say, well, okay, I didn't mean that. And we have an opportunity to clarify. But what you write will bind you. So we need to make sure that the written communication is accurate, it is brief, and it is concise. Comments? And just as a kind of en passant, we need to make sure it's grammatically correct. No, that's a real issue. Huh? That's a real issue in today's world. Especially because we think that once that the computer will underline, will redline it, or green line it, or blue, or whatever the color is. But it will not do that contextually. It will do it if it's, subject matter disagreement. But there's some contextual things that will not happen. So you need to take responsibility for that. Questions, comments?
Coming back to the point you were making about interpersonal and intrapersonal, you made an interesting point about emptying your head before you start the communication. That's easier said than done. How does one do that? Empty your head.
From where I stand, it is really called discipline. That you have to focus. You have to prepare. For example, before you have a telephone conversation, you ask yourself, why am I calling this person? What is the objective I hope to achieve? What are the takeaways? What is an area that I'm just not going to concede on? And then you make the phone call. But how many of us just pick up the phone? And we start the call? How many of us text people? And in the text, we're talking serious business, right? But it's in abbreviations, it is in incomplete sentences, and so on. If you're going to do that, the next time you get to somewhere where you can write a full sentence, you need to confirm that earlier today, these are the issues we agreed, and send that off. So the person is able to look at it and then come back to you and say, no, that's not what we agreed. Otherwise, you end up in real trouble. But emptying your mind is a matter of discipline. Yes? Sure, there's a pearl we're getting here.
Sure. Sorry, a trick that I had developed in making phone calls is, what is the objective for the phone call? I'll type the email before. And then by the time I'm finished with the phone call, I know that I can just press send. Because what is in the email is exactly what I communicated on the phone. That's a trick that I developed.
It's a good trick. It works for you. I would be careful for me because I often see the world from my perspective. And sometimes I don't have the discipline to go back and say, but that's not exactly what it is. So the learning in that is if you're going to use a trick like that, you have to edit. Go back and verify that this is exactly what we discussed. Okay? All right, so we're still talking the communications model, and by now we've looked at a range of issues. We've also talked about body language, meaning that is a non-verbal form of communication, and how that impacts our encounter with people. Any burning issues on any of the tables? Yeah?
I'm wondering what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
What do you mean?
When, like the lady spoke about that disconnect with written communication. In today's society, we are seeing written communication more of a connect to the younger generation. And when they see face to face, they don't talk.
And yes.
But give them a cell phone and spread them apart. And they're like, all the time, their fingers on those knobs going and abbreviation and LOL and all the fancy abbreviations. So it's a little cause for concern later on. And what we are seeing is those grammatical errors we're talking about is a major issues in terms of the words, choice of words they use, grammar, in the context they use it. It's really a challenge, and we are seeing it coming out at university. The students, they are challenged with things like grammar.
All right. And you accept that the area you're raising is outside my parameter, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a very good issue for us to think through. And to me, one of the implications of the issue that you're raising, is really what is the responsibility of organizations with regard to their entry-level people? We used to make an assumption that people came into the organization understanding dress and grooming, understanding how to eat with a knife and fork, understanding how to approach people. We used to make that assumption. We can no longer make that assumption. So organizations have to be asking themselves, what is my responsibility? Because the cost of engagement is high. So am I going to add to that cost and invest in people who are now coming into the organization? Or am I going to just take the the approach that says the scattershot approach, bring plenty, and some will survive. You know, so it's a big question that we have to move on to. All right, yes?
Speaking about burning issues, I have one. I will not give my opinion on it. What about sexual orientation?
As what?
As in, people have different views now. Now we have homosexuals who might be a good business person but not accepted in the business forum.
But you see, just as my ethnicity ought not to impact our business relations, how I present myself in terms of my sexual orientation ought not to impact it. But we all know that we have prejudices and biases, you know. And some of us need to spend a lot more time understanding that the heterosexual relationship is no longer, or is changing. The standard of the heterosexual relationship is changing, and we need to sometimes be able to evaluate, you know, is this a good business proposition? What is the added value this person is bringing? And take that on board and be able to remove our biases and prejudices. And I could hear people thinking, you talking that. I don't like nobody who looking figgy around me. You know, that's your view, but you know, the world is different. Because where does it end? You don't like short people, so you don't kill all of us? You know, so you really have to identify what is the business proposition here and what is the added value. Okay? Yes?
Younger people coming into the organization. But when we speak here in the context of export and building a relationship with a receiver or the person you're trying to build ties with, in some cases, there are younger and younger people in executive positions, particularly in the United States, probably due to education, probably due to their tech-savvy nature, and they move up very highly, and you could find yourself facing somebody who's quite younger than you, and you have to be proposing to them. And in some instances, that might create a disconnect as well, because you don't expect to see a younger person than yourself in front of you. So age as well, I think, should be considered when we talking about building relationships, particularly internationally.
All right. I'm just being spontaneous here. And I want us to consider, with your permission, we kind of exhausted the communication model, but I'm hearing an issue of diversity. And I just want us to consider here, what are the different kinds of diversity that we need to deal with? We just talked about age, we talked about gender. What else? Race. I don't like to put race, I like to put ethnicity. Religion. Orientation. Diversity in terms of attire may not come as part of the diversity package, because diversity tends to be, attire tends to be culturally bound, and that could be part of the diversity package. But what else are we talking about? Education. How do you know someone's education? The resume. And if you don't have a resume, how they approach language will generally give you an idea of their education. Any other diversity issues that we want to just flag? If you put them on the agenda, then we kind of empty the head and say, all right, we deal with that. May or not have dealt with it detailed.
Particularly inside Trinidad, people are very aware of political markers of
Yeah. The political markers are particularly difficult, extremely difficult and extremely unfair. And it's an area of growth for our country that we have to stop this political markers thing. And I'll just give you my opinion on it, and that is that in a population of 1.3 million people, we don't have that many bright people and competent people. We just don't. So if you start using political marker as a reason or an indication of who we're going to treat with, we really we're really putting ourselves at a disadvantage. So we need to understand that, you know, the politics is the politics, it is what it is. But in terms of competence and value, let's bring the best to the table. But that, I know, that's a hard, hard one in this country because we haven't evolved. I am very gentle on our society that we're evolving and we need to grow and, you know, but it's a big political marker. Any other diversity issues we need to deal with? Physical disabilities, wow. What do you mean by that, though?
There would be someone who may not be able to walk or have some sort of handicap, but that doesn't mean that they can't execute the job.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be used as a marker.
And that's an obvious one. There are some others that are not so
Yes,
obvious.
yeah.
Like what? We tend to look
Speech.
at...
Sometimes speech impediment, yeah.
Yes, a speech impairment, yes. But we tend to look at fat people as incompetent.
Obesity.
You know, and I'm even getting an example, she says, in the HSSE industry, they look at fat people as incompetent. You know, so we need to just have these diversity issues in our head and understand that those impact our communication. And if we're going to be professional, if we're going to be objective, we really need to remove those. Be careful, just get rid of them. And I know some of you must be saying, lady, you tell me too much about get rid of. These are things that I deal with all the time. I do as well. But you have to get rid of it. Otherwise, you make decisions that you will regret.
But that's why I posed the question about, I mean, you encourage the discipline of emptying your head. And if that discipline is encouraged, let's say in the business communication sphere, let's say there are many Denise Deming placed all through the business sector. They converge on their discipline and their influence converge in the global climate. I would expect that the trend would be, given that all of us are being taught to empty our heads, there will be a tendency or trend towards greater accommodation of diversity. But you're still saying no, you're not seeing it.
No, the reason I did this exercise is because of the feedback I was getting.
Okay.
That a lot of people are bringing diversity issues when we're talking about the communication model. And one of the ways to deal with it is simply let's list it. So at least we understand some of the things that impact our decision making. Because we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and our biases and prejudices are going to disappear.
No, but I was thinking in terms of training our people, let's say, who are in the export business, and those are the frontiers. Should we be training them or encouraging them, given what you're teaching, to sort of try and encourage the discipline of emptying our heads, sort of diluting or peripheralizing the biases a little bit, and actually that might tend to probably move towards an increased opportunities for global businesses, because you have that milieu of cultures playing in that market, I think.
I agree with you. Yes, and I agree with you. I agree with you. And you just triggered a memory that I have. Sometime, maybe about 20 years ago, the government of Botswana looked around the world and was looking for people who present as black and who appeared to be suave in terms of business, and selected Trinidad and Tobago as a place to harvest. Harvest is my word, but to harvest talent. And they brought a lot of Trinidadians into Botswana to lead a lot of their organizations. And it was because we were seen as people who understand diversity and who are on the cutting edge of diversity in terms of developing countries. So there are some positives of some of the things that we have gone through. Yes, yeah. All right, so that's an export market that was totally unintended. Totally unintended, but worked. Yes?
If I may add, while know your customer is one element, know your company is another element, but the issues being raised, I use that know your competition. And if my competition doesn't understand the elements of the markets in which they enter, then my company is best positioned to take advantage of it. And as such, while I'm not going to discount the issues of globalization, internet, possessing a competitive edge through these elements is what I will work my company through. And certainly diversity and talent management is where I will start the process, recognizing that it yields a competitive edge. So I think stakeholders, mapping, competitive analysis play a larger role as we move forward into the international sector.
Thank you very much. Comments? All right. Yes, one more. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to ask something. In terms of all the items identified under diversity, clearly there will be some conflict with some. In terms of, we have this moral ethics values where business is concerned. And some of the issues raised there that we need to consider under diversity, sexual orientation, for example, religion, those are the two that stand out right now significantly. How do we, how would you say that is dealt with in terms of moral ethics values when in particular circumstance you have those items would be identified as immoral, depending on which way you go with it. The value standard would look low, depending on which way you go with it. How do you treat with those?
I don't have a silver bullet, huh? Let me start off by saying that. Boy, you're making me dig real deep. All right. There's a continuum that we use, that there are things that are morally correct, there are things that are ethically acceptable, and there are things that are either legal or illegal. We don't deal here at all. If it is illegal, we don't do it. No matter what it is, if it is illegal, we don't do it. If it is illegal in Trinidad to have inducement, to sign a contract, we don't do it. And I say that and, you know, I'm almost feeling like a fraud if I take the popular discussion. But if it is illegal, you don't do it. And you don't do it because eventually illegality will come back to haunt you no matter what you do. This is where it begins to be gray, the things that are that are unethical and the things that are immoral, because those are based on our own value systems. And organizations have to determine what is your value proposition, what is your value statement. Once you've made that value statement, you have to live in accordance with it. And that value statement ought to encompass some of the gray areas that we often see. So to me, dealing with, in response to your question, you really need to go back to, has the organization established what are its core values? And you need to operate according to those core values. Yes?
Just make a point around ethics and morals, because they're two different things. And I think that we often, in the conversation in Trinidad, confuse ethics and morals. And they're actually two very different concepts. Ethics is a set of rules which have been determined by either a formal group or an informal group by a society, but it's rules-based. So a company can have an ethical code. A company can't have a moral code. Moral code comes from personal beliefs and opinions. So company can't say it has a moral code, but it can say it has an ethical code because it's written. An individual can have a moral code. A company can't have a moral code. I think we need to make a distinction between those two things. And in the business world, we need to concentrate on ethics and not on morals. Morals come from other things. It may come from a religion. A lot of people's morals come from what they're told as their religious, belief systems are. But that's different to ethics. I think if we confuse them, then we get in all sorts of trouble. There's people who can be highly ethical, who your personal belief, maybe they live an immoral lifestyle, but they're a highly ethical person because they follow all the rules of a profession or the society has said.
And just to layer on that, the subjectivity part of what we think is morally right or wrong is highly subjective. That's according to me, as opposed to what the organization believes in. So using a fact or a statistic is an excellent way to start a presentation and to engage people. Because around facts and statistics, people, their brain becomes very in tune with you and they understand what you're saying. They will also remember it. It's highly memorable. All right. Before I go to that, yes? I'm listening.
Let me test it out perfectly. Just wondering two things. Quotations, use of quotations. But back to Sham's point about store certification. Now, most companies who have store certificates use it as a selling point, right? So it's kind of surprising that is when you mention it, right? That it's not as a wow factor.
Yeah.
Now, in my marketing of my company, it's a wow factor. We are store certified, right? So I'm sort of wondering, how do we make that awareness? Because it's an investment of the company, which is HSC Systems, to get store certified. So to hear you not too overly concerned, I mean not in a way of, no, it's good. Because if the layperson is not understanding why we have the store certification, then when we go to the export market and the international companies come and ask, well, store certification, okay, for example, we are trade certified. So that is understood in the American market. But store certification, I'm now kind of a little concerned that the layperson in our local market is just, store certified, moving on. Right?
All right.
So how do we counteract that?
Well, I don't know if you need to counteract it. I think what you need to do is analyze what are the expectations of my target audience. And my target audience expects me to have whatever the certification is, however you describe it. So that's an expectation, that's nothing different. They expect me to be an organization that does its financial reports, nothing different. You ask yourself, what are the standard expectations? And then you go to, okay, what is my unique selling point? What is different? And from where I sit, store certification, just as TQM certification, just as VAT clearance, is ho-hum, normal. Yes?
Yeah, and I think the point with that is that it was important. 2 years ago, it was a selling point. When you're the third company to be STO certified, then that was a selling point. But now when there's 280 or 285 companies who are STO certified, it's no longer a selling point. It's an expectation that you have to have in the market. Now what becomes a selling point now is we now have companies we have the first company who achieved 100% conformance. Now that they can use to market themselves. So they say, we're the first company to receive 100% conformance. Now that becomes a marketing tool. Or if you're the first in a sector, we're the first security company to become.
And the learning in that is that the goalposts change all the time. Huh? So what was a wow yesterday is not a wow today. It's normal. It's ho-hum. What's your reaction to what Dax has contributed?
No, it's an investment and it's a cost to an organization to become STO certified. Therefore, I think it's requisite on the provider to ensure that it is the premier product, right? So if I'm saying, and yes, we are the first organization to be STO certified. We're also the first organization, like Petroleum, to have a 2-year certification. We have achieved 99% in our last report. These are just statistics and facts, but it doesn't sell me to a Japanese company coming here, a drilling contractor saying, hey, it's 218 companies. My point is, it's 218 companies out of Trinidad and Tobago, right? So if I get the marketing as a correlation with my company, then STO certification becomes much more higher.
But I don't think you can be selling STO certification as your unique selling point.
No.
You have to find something else.
No, I agree, but it is one of our criteria.
It's a criteria to do business. Right. It is similar to the things I understand. Yeah. In order to do business, you have to have audited accounts. But you don't go around saying, we have audited accounts, therefore do business with us.
Well, you see, it comes back to my checklist. Now, if I think of my audience, so I'll say, okay, instead of audited financials, I'll say banker's reference, right? I'll get a banker's reference.
In the same way, is a banker's reference a marketing tool?
For me, yes.
Just on the point, I think that there are certain brands which certification can bring. And then if you say alignment with a brand, then it shows the strength of your organization. So that's why people will say they're an ISO certified company and they'll put it on their letterhead. Or you're in a pizza registered training center, for ACTT accredited training center, because it's a brand. Safe to work in Trinidad at the moment in the oil and gas industry is that. So people are putting it on all their branding material because it has become a brand that you want to be associated with. Now, we don't have an international brand for it yet. So trying to use it in an international market is difficult because you have to then explain the whole background to it. But it is a brand that we can use but it's something which is going to have to happen more at a industry country level than a specific company level. I think it's difficult at the moment for it to be a company a company aligned branding tool in the international market until it gets an international recognition, which it can get. You just have to work it.
Okay, so I could move on? All right. He added quotations. Any other opening approaches that we could use? We use facts and statistics, humor, subject, verb, subject, title, yes?
Cultural norms.
Give me an example.
I made a presentation in Dubai once, and before I made the presentation, I was speaking to the people, residents of Dubai, and asking them, well, give me some pointers. I said, you must start off by saying Salam Alaikum. Salam Alaikum.
Yeah.
And it's not religious, it's not religion in any way, it's just a peace beyond you greeting.
Yeah.
That if you don't start off with that, they don't respect you.
Yeah. So it needs you, yes.
You have to start off with that. And a lot of the other presenters who were before me didn't know that, and they didn't get the audience interaction that they were looking for. When because I said that and I gave them a moment to say it back to me, it then spurred them on to then interact with me a little more.
Okay, so that the greeting in a culturally acceptable manner worked for you. But that wouldn't work in the United States, right? So you have to know the audience. We have to go back to knowing the audience, knowing the culture. All right, any other ways to start a presentation? Yes, you wanted to make a comment on that, yes.
I just wondered, in your sort of starter kit, for example, UWI, we are proud to say that we are a premier regional institution producing graduates par excellence, for example, persons like yourself. And so that connectivity with people and their performance, especially for a service, for example, as Dak says, where you can't see it, you actually have to see the performance of your service. How valuable it is once the track record of person or persons are great. For example, one of the things I see in our marketing and communication is that we boast about having senior persons in various institutions at top decision-making points. How valuable is that? Pros and cons for that sort of making that connection in your starter kit.
In your starter kit, it's important. However, I think the languaging that you just gave me is not something that would make me sit back. Because when you talk about premium intellect, excuse me, give me a break.
Yeah.
Who you have? I mean, if I had to create that, I would probably identify some people.
Persons, right.
You know, and get their permission. And as a way to connect, say, you know, among the graduates of UWI are. And I give some big names.
And identify some
And you
names.
identify them.
Okay, great.
But I really feel that you ought to develop some language around that statistics and facts about the kind of graduates. For example, if you were able to say that 5% of UWI's graduates occupy management positions in the top 500 companies in this country, you know, so that people can wrap their head around and know that, you know, as opposed to the narrative. Sometimes the narrative is too much, and people don't remember it. All right, any other ways to start a presentation?
Probably breaking the ice between you and your audience by using something that might be current. You know, something current that is...
So using a topical story as a way to start your presentation.
To start.
Yeah,
like recently we had our meeting, and after the presentation was done by the team, was my turn, and my opening comments was morning, you know, like normal thing. And then I said, does anyone know of people who are very poor and can't get clothing? And then, so I repeated it. And a couple of people put up their hands. And then I said, okay, well, the people that have the Germany T-shirts here will be giving it away after Sunday. You know? So can I use the current? No,
that
just
was,
an idea, you know, a current
that is, you've given us some points there, and it's really a nice way that you used it. He thought through, how can I attract people's attention? So I start off with something that will connect everybody. You know, do you know anybody who needs clothes? And then you go to the current topic. You notice my fingernails are blue, right? That's because I was supporting Argentina. And then you linked it to the cricket, the football. So using a topical story is a way to start a presentation. And that's a way to help people to connect. But you know that doesn't happen like that. You have to think it through from before, so that when you do it, it's effective and it really pulls people in. But lovely approach. So using a topical story is one of them. I thought you would come with room 201 again. Eh? How else can we start a presentation? Take two pull? No. All right. Those are just some ways we can start a presentation. And what we can do is use those very methods of starting the presentation as a way to end the presentation. I'm not saying start and end in the same way. But I'm saying, let's say you use a topical story. To start, you can use a fact or statistic to end. Because what you want is you want people to be with you throughout your presentation. And some research was done about how people listen or participate in presentations. And they really did a graph of what happens. And the graph went something like this, that at the start of the presentation, people's interest, it's up here. And within 3 to 5 minutes, it goes down here. And then as you use words like a statistic, you suddenly see it go back up. And then it goes back down as you continue. And then you use some kind of quotation and it goes back up. And then it goes back down. So what we're saying here is when you graph people's presentation, as the more you speak, the more you lose them. But as you bring in statistics, facts, words like in conclusion, words like in summary, then you pique their interest and you're able to hold them a little more. So for the entire presentation, you want to be littering your presentation with hooks that will bring people back in to whatever it is you're saying. And in the sales presentation, which is what you're doing, you're doing sales presentation. People don't like to hear that. But you're doing the sales presentation. In that presentation, what you're doing is you're constantly giving them information about your organization or about your product that will match with whatever their audience profile is. So we can use the same way. Now, if we're doing, let's say we're not doing a business presentation and you're doing a more motivational presentation and so on, there are some techniques that work. Things like a call to action. That works. You know, you say to people, so as a result of this, we will now be donating 200% of whatever to charity. People like to hear that. So apart from the call to action, things like asking people to repeat something that you've said. I know people find that absolutely corny. Absolutely corny. But if you can get people to just repeat what you say after me, that as a result of this presentation, I will commit to. That helps. That works. All right? Questions, comments? All right, I'll lose 2 people. Dax is not because you're bored, right? I'm kidding. All right, delivering oral messages. The extemporaneous way of delivering an oral message is the best approach. And when we talk about extemporaneous, if you think that Gypsy and them, that's just come up in their head at the time, think again. Huh? Those extemporaneous messages have been rehearsed and they've become intimately involved with them. So somebody throws a word to them and they respond. So when I talk about extemporaneous, I do not mean fly-by-night and spontaneous. I mean it's a way of doing it. It appears extemporaneous. That is your best method. And let's go back to what we started with. We talked about your key message, what's my objective in like 1 sentence. We talked about having a script. We talked about having your key points at the end of it. So you have your bullets. So that's where you're using it. 3x5 cards or cell phones or iPads and so on work in today's world, but do not get into the hook of you have a full script on the iPad and you're trying to read the script. Because then what we see is this. And we can recognize most of our ministers by this part of their head. Can't we? Just see that and I know who it is. All right. Reading can work with the right technology, and the only person who I've seen do that very well, and forgive my bias, is Barack Obama. I mean, he uses teleprompters like nothing, and you think he's talking to you. but generally you could see where the teleprompters are. In Trinidad, we haven't figured out how to use teleprompters. We have the equipment, but we haven't figured out how to use it. When we're doing a presentation, make sure that your pitch is right, and there are strategies to work out what is your pitch, as we have been told and as we've seen. But we all don't have that level of competence. So there are some things that we're going to do, and hopefully it will come up in the next slide. Use the rate of presentation to pull people in, because ever so often you want to make sure that your audience is with you. So you may want to raise your voice, you may want to lower, you may want to speak faster, or you may want to slow down. What you want to do is vary what we call the texture of the presentation. All right. Statement here about your outward appearance mirrors your inner mood. So if you're going to do a presentation, make sure you prepare for it. Don't be waiting until the next morning to say, what am I going to wear? Men generally don't have a problem, because there's a shirt, there's the tie, there's the jacket. But for men, be careful. Sometimes the tie looking tired, or the shirt not quite right, or the color scheme not quite right. So at least spend some time working that out. And there are some men who say, but that's not important. If we say that your outward appearance mirrors your inner mood, then let's work with that. Make sure we're looking crisp. An issue that I have with men is often they smell musky. And I'm not being mean. But no, what's that? They smell musky. The point I'm making is the jacket hole smells. And if you're not laundering your jacket frequently or airing it out frequently, and you're just pulling on that jacket every time you have to do this presentation, you wouldn't even realize that that jacket is smelling musky. And the people around you get accustomed to the smell. So they're not going to tell you anything. So ever so often you have to go through this sniff thing, going, smell my clothes. Is it all right? Yeah.
If you go to Colombia, you use the jacket daily.
So the point about the jacket, all I want to say is, make sure it's smelling right. Which means it mustn't have the old kind of stuff on it, right? Men with jackets, get rid of your school blazers. Your university blazer, just get rid of it. It has no place in business. What you laugh? This one is absolutely amused. So, and women, you need to be careful. Make sure that people are not seeing your outfit before they see you, or seeing your makeup before they see you. So make sure that it is nice and consistent and, kind of mellow, as opposed to the fashion statements. Leave the fashion statements for in the evenings. All right, how do we decrease stage fright? You want what? I haven't touched enough on the ladies. I have a little time constraint. But is there anything you want me to talk about? He harasses me about trying to touch enough on the ladies. If there's a particular issue that you'd like me, you could. Decreasing stage fright. Become an SME, a subject matter expert, and rehearse. Moving along. How do we do a successful pitch? There's this thing called the elevator pitch. Assume that you're in an elevator and you have between the ground floor and the 10th floor to sell to someone. That's about 30 seconds, maybe a minute if, they're stopping on different places. And a lot of this is repetitive. We want our objective in one sentence. So you need to really sit down and ask yourself, what's my elevator pitch about whatever my product is? And again, write it out, bring it down to bullet points, and know it. Ensure that you know it. Taking a problem-solving approach makes a difference, because people are not interested in your narrative. But if what you're telling them will help them solve a problem, then they're interested in that. So you need to identify what is really the problem that my organization is solving. And I'm looking at you simply because of the previous discussion that we had. So take a problem-solving approach to it. Identify your target market. Who is this target market that I am selling this to? Identify the competition. Somebody earlier in the day talked about the competition. Because a lot of people, it is the competition that makes you lose, gets you off the table, what that competition is offering. A note on competition is you need to know your parameters. Because you may want to compete and then you sell all the profit margin for the principals. And then you need a job. So you need to know what your parameters are when you're looking, because the competition sometimes offer. In Trinidad, I don't understand, there's some things I don't understand about competition. I don't understand, for example, how, and this is a very personal one, how produce in Shogunas is so much cheaper than produce in the north. And transportation cannot be the only factor accounting for that. So we need to understand what the competition is, yes? I still don't understand it. I don't understand it. The market, the geography is too small. Right, okay, moving along. What are the milestones? So when you're making a pitch to someone, you need to let them know what the milestones are. What is it we're going to measure at this point, what we're going to measure at another point, and what we're going to measure at the end. So that they then understand, they then cued into what is it you are trying to sell. And finally, make sure you have a one-sentence pitch. Because it is the one-sentence pitch that will get you the second opportunity. And that one-sentence pitch, we call it all kinds of things. We call it your 30-second commercial. We call it your, what is the key message that we want to communicate to everybody. But you need to have a one-sentence pitch that I could pitch to whoever the audience is. Questions? All right, some things that audiences know about you. They know how you're feeling that day. They know if you're uncomfortable. We do? I wouldn't know exactly what your discomfort is. But I know that something isn't right here. They know if you've memorized your presentation. Because invariably, when you've memorized your presentation, your eyes don't light up. Because what you're doing is you're digging deep to memorize this thing. I got my lessons about memorization very early in life, so I will never do it. And I was doing an exam, and I'm not very good at quantitative exams. So I memorized what the answer should be. And I got stuck, and my brain kept saying to me, give me the figure, and I'll give you the rest. So memorization is not recommended at all. All right. I just want to touch on one other bit of information, and that is 10 tips when doing business in Africa. And it says Africa is not one country. It's a similar thing that Africa is not one country. So don't think, and a lot of people think South Africa is Africa. And they think that Nigeria is Africa. Remember there's South Africa and then there's Africa, and Africa comprises a range of countries. So you need to understand each country that you're dealing with. So you have to tailor your approach to the specific country that you're dealing with. You need to start by contacting the official channels. Trinidadians like this thing about have a hookup and know somebody. That is great, but start your business by contacting the official channels, because that's where you will get the official information, and then you can make a decision about the extent to which you could deviate or if you can deviate from it. Anticipate legal or administrative obstacles in Africa. If they don't want to do business with you, they will find all kinds of barriers. And oftentimes, legal and trading things are barriers to entry. So you need to understand those and understand if it is really, is this a legal requirement or is this really a barrier? Is it that they don't really want us here? Understand the environment in which you're going to operate, and if you can establish a local partner, that makes a difference. But we need to also understand who is the local partner. And again, it's not the first person that you got to know. I'll give you an example, and this doesn't have to do with Africa, but I was talking to a client, and the client wanted to engage young people. And they decided that, they recommended that the way to engage young people is to have an alignment with Scotch. We know Scotch? Scotch magazine and Scotch fetes and all of that. And I said to the client, I don't understand why you'd want to enter the youth market at that end of it. Because that's the lower end of it. If you're looking for a DJ, if you're looking for that kind of thing, there are others. Who are they? Major Lazer. Major Lazer. There are others. And we had a long discussion about the entry point and what are you looking for. If you enter at the lower end of the market, and I mean the culturally lower end of the market, it is very difficult for you to move from that culturally lower end of the market to the culturally higher end of the market. So you need to do enough research to understand what is your best entry point. Because remember, people are always looking to aspire to the brand. They don't aspire downwards. It's always the upward aspiration. Comments, questions? All right. You need to invest a lot of time in Africa if you're going to work and do any export or anything in Africa. You need to spend a lot of time there. It may mean spending 3 months at a time. And one of the reasons you need to do that is that Africa is a very, and I'm using it in a kind of total Africa and not the specific countries, is a very dynamic place. Things change almost by the moment. A little bit like Trini, right? Hire your employees where your business is located, but that's a two-edged sword because sometimes that's how you can lose your business, by hiring in that location where people will come together and literally elbow you out. And the final thing is that Africans place a high value on relationships. But we've heard that before, that there are cultures in which there's a tremendously high value on relationships. All right, questions, comments? All right, that's the end of the material. Sorry. That's the end of the material that I prepared to share with you.